post-morning tea session, as you can see from your program, is about peak oil and the Millennium Development Goals. And we have three speakers, Bruce Robinson, Peter Strachan and Paul Tranter. And if you follow the small bios that are there, you will see that Bruce Robinson, and I'm losing the light, Bruce Robinson is convener of the Australian Association for the Study of Peak Oil, and there are organisations across the globe now of similar sorts of studying this very important phenomenon. And he's studied the depletion of oil since 1990. And has presented invited papers at international conferences, etc., etc., etc. Peter Robinson writes quite prolifically. I think most of, or many of you in this audience will have at some stage come across emails and other material containing stuff that he's written. And I think it will be very, very interesting to hear what he has to say to us this morning, and particularly in relation to how peak oil will impact on the achievement of those Millennium Development Goals. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be here. I've learnt a hell of a lot about more about climate change and a lot of things about sustainable population that I didn't know. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm going to give a bit of an overview about peak oil, as people have on some of the other things, and talk briefly about its impacts on the Millennium Development Goals and the things available for Australia. But firstly, just perhaps to let you know a little bit about ASPO Australia. We're a non-government organisation, entirely volunteer-based, a group of professionals from around Australia working to reduce oil vulnerability. We've got a whole range of working groups, and these are here to illustrate in part the breadth of the things that, rather than just concentrating in peak oil and the global economy or peak oil in Australia or whatever, we're looking at the impact on the finance sector or your superannuation or the health sector, social services, as someone who's interested in remote Indigenous communities who are very dependent on diesel, and a whole range of things. We have recently formed a children and peak oil working group that Paul's involved in, and we'd like to have a population and peak oil working group as well. In addition, we're trying to suggest to academia that there's an oil vulnerability research network to be developed. There's a lot of academia working on climate change, very little in the academic sphere with CSIRO or universities working on peak oil vulnerability. So an oil vulnerability research centre, research network would seem to be a good idea. Volunteers to contribute to ASPO in any way, suggestions be really good. Peak oil is a time when global oil production, which has been rising steadily, plateaus off and goes down. It's not running out of oil. We're never going to run out of oil, and the people who say running out of oil are usually either trying to muddy the waters. ExxonMobil keeps saying we're not running out of oil. No one has said we were. So they're either journos looking for a quick headline or someone trying to be misleading. The most likely forecast date for peak oil, and as an Australian, you could say, what are the bookies seeing? I think the even money is on 2012, but with a spread about plus or minus 5 years. So Richard Dennis talked about precision and accuracy. So there's a bit of a spread there, but that's another way you could put that's a weighted average of the various forecasts. Another topic, peak exports, that's the amount of oil available in the open markets, is actually what Australia as an importing country is interested in, and that's likely to be sooner. Peak oil will impact on the MDGs, of course, unless the developed world takes a lot of action to reduce its own consumption to leave enough for the others, and there's options for Australia. So that's roughly what I hope to cover. You'd know that the United States reached its peak of production in 1970, as had been forecast by Hubbard. The US peak going up there, its economic and global and military power was based on the upswing of the oil, and one can wonder what might happen on the downslope. The little blip on the right-hand side of the graph is the Alaskan oil fields. A really big new oil field didn't make a lot of difference to the overall trend. Dr. Ali Samson Bakhtiari visited Australia 3 times. He briefed the WA Cabinet at the invitation of Premier Gallup in 2004. When I first met him in the first ASPO conference, he gave a very interesting paper that's on the web, but suggested there's going to be a global oil crunch. probably within the current decade. And he thought it'd need a number of miracles to get us out of the fix. But on theological grounds, from the cradle of the world's big religions, he thought that asking the Almighty for a number of simultaneous miracles on theological grounds was a big ask. I'm not sure if the theologians here agree on that. The other biblical analogy ran was very interesting, that the Noah analogy. Noah was warned about the coming storms and floods and do this and that. And Noah had built his ark and organised it before it started raining. And he had an analogy that we should do things like that for peak oil, prepare for peak oil. And the analogy that's useful is that it's actually bloody hard to build an ark underwater. It's much more efficient. It's much more efficient and easier, and you don't get as wet if you build it beforehand. And that's an important point that he made. I'm showing sides from a whole range of people because I don't want to provide my opinion. I'm just a reporter of what's happening. Dr. Sadat Al-Husseini is Vice President of Saudi Aramco, the biggest oil company in the world. I think certainly the Saudi National Oil Company. And he was giving, he retired 2004, giving a talk in October last year. He was forecasting, amongst other things, a 10-year plateau. That's not a peak oil, but a little flat bit, and then a downturn. And this was determined by geology, not by economic forces. He also used this graph showing that although the price had been rising until October when the graph he was providing, it's now gone higher, that the production hadn't risen. The economists tell us no worries. If the price of eggs is high enough, even the roosters will start to lay, to quote Brian Fisher of ABER, a colourful character who's no longer there, but he's still around. But the rising prices haven't increased the production. The production's been flat, and so the economics that we hear about is seriously questioned. The Energy Watch group in Germany, recently in October again, Jörg Schindler and Werner Zietel, who part of the Energy Watch group, read a detailed forecast, again a peak, they're suggesting a peak now or 2006 or something. On the top there's the World Energy Outlook forecast. The International Energy Agency puts out all sorts of forecasts. They sound very impressive, but the International Energy Agency is a cartel set up to counterbalance OPEC. International Energy Agency set up by OECD is a cartel of the oil consuming nations set up to counterbalance the oil producing nations. So they have in the past been more ideologically driven than some. The two vertical lines there are one where we are today, roughly at the peak, and the next one at 2015 is where we might be at the time we're hoping to achieve some of the Millennium Development Goals, and that means that we may well be seriously into peak oil by that time, and that makes it harder. The International Energy Agency has been becoming more realistic, changing its tune, and in July, in a mid-term report, suggested market tightness beyond 2010 and OPEC not having any spare capacity by 2012. This isn't mentioning peak oil, but it's not inconsistent with some of the things that about 2012 or perhaps sooner there might be a problem. And International Energy Agency, like other people, has been systematically optimistic in the past. Chris Skabowski spoke in a tour around Australia in 2006. He's editor of the Petroleum Review in London. That's published by the Energy Institute in London. He's a petroleum geologist and a reporter for a long time, and he pointed out the blindingly obvious. We're talking about flows. That peak oil is about the rate of production, not about the reserves in the ground. When ExxonMobil say, no worries, we've got X amount, all this oil in the ground, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the decline of production, which might happen about halfway. Saying there's a lot of reserves left doesn't get you very far. We're talking about deliverability. And as our cousins in the United States say in their own inimitable way, it's not the size of the tank, it's the size of the tap.